The lighthouse keeper's secret. The storm had been brewing for 3 days, and Sarah Chen knew it would be the worst she'd seen in her 2 years as keeper of Beacon Point Lighthouse. The waves crashed against the rocky shore below with a violence that made the century-old structure shudder, and the wind howled through every crack and crevice like a living thing desperate to get inside. Sarah had grown up in the coastal town of Millbrook, just 5 miles inland, but she'd never experienced the ocean's fury from this vantage point. The lighthouse stood on a narrow peninsula, surrounded on 3 sides by water that could shift from peaceful blue to murderous gray in a matter of hours. Tonight, it was black as coal, illuminated only by the sweeping beam of the lighthouse and the occasional flash of lightning. She climbed the spiral staircase to the lamp room, her boots echoing in the hollow tower. The Fresnel lens rotated slowly, sending its warning light far out to sea. It was an automated system now, but Sarah still checked it every few hours during storms. Old habits died hard, and the previous keeper, Marcus Webb, had drilled the importance of vigilance into her before his retirement. The light is everything, he'd told her on her first day. Ships depend on it, lives depend on it. But sometimes, Sarah, the light reveals things we're not supposed to see. At the time, she'd thought he was being dramatic. Marcus was in his 70s, had spent 40 years alone on this rock, and had a tendency toward the philosophical. But now, as she peered out into the storm, his words took on new meaning. A flash of lightning illuminated the horizon, and for just a moment, Sarah saw something that made her heart skip. A ship, much closer to shore than any vessel should be in this weather. She grabbed the binoculars and waited for the next flash. There it was again, a large yacht, maybe 60 feet long, listing heavily to starboard. Its running lights were dark, which explained why she hadn't spotted it sooner. Sarah rushed to the radio. Coast Guard Station Millbrook, this is Beacon Point Light. I have a vessel in distress, approximately half a mile southeast of my position. Large yacht, appears to be taking on water. Over. Static crackled back at her. She tried again, adjusting the frequency. Nothing. The storm must have knocked out communications. Sarah cursed under her breath and reached for her cell phone, but there was no signal. She was completely cut off. The lighthouse beam swept around again, and this time she saw something that chilled her more than the October wind. Figures on the deck of the yacht, 3 of them, struggling with what looked like a life raft. But there was something wrong with the scene, something that didn't fit the narrative of a boat in distress. Sarah focused the binoculars and waited. When the light came around again, she could see more clearly. The figures weren't preparing to abandon ship, they were throwing something overboard. Something heavy, wrapped in what looked like canvas. Her blood went cold. She'd heard the stories, the whispered rumors in town about boats that came and went in the night, about the lighthouse keeper before Marcus who'd disappeared without a trace 20 years ago. People said he'd seen too much, knew too much about the things that happened in the dark waters around Beacon Point. Another lightning flash, and the yacht was closer now, maybe a quarter mile out. Sarah could see it was definitely sinking, settling lower in the water with each passing minute. But the men on deck, she could tell they were men now, didn't seem panicked. They moved with purpose, methodically heaving bundles over the side. Sarah faced a terrible choice. Coast Guard protocol demanded she attempt a rescue, but her every instinct screamed danger. These weren't innocent boaters caught in a storm. They were disposing of evidence, using the tempest as cover for something sinister. She watched through the binoculars as one of the figures looked directly at the lighthouse. Even at this distance, even in the storm, she felt the weight of his gaze. He raised something to his eyes, binoculars of his own, and Sarah instinctively stepped back from the window. Too late. He'd seen her watching. The yacht's engine roared to life, a deep throaty sound that cut through the storm. Sarah watched in amazement as the boat straightened and began moving toward shore. It hadn't been sinking after all. The list had been deliberate, to make the disposal of whatever they were dumping easier. Now they were coming for her. Sarah's mind raced. The lighthouse was isolated, accessible only by a narrow causeway that flooded during high tide. In this storm, that causeway was already under 3 feet of water. She was trapped, and whoever was on that yacht knew it. She ran down the stairs to the living quarters, her heart pounding. The lighthouse had been her sanctuary for 2 years, a place of peace after the chaos of her life in Boston. She'd come here to escape an abusive relationship, to find herself again in the solitude and rhythm of lighthouse keeping. Now that sanctuary was about to become a prison. The sound of the yacht's engine grew louder. Sarah peered out a lower window and saw lights approaching the small dock at the base of the lighthouse. 3 figures in dark rain gear climbed out, moving with military precision. One of them carried what looked like an automatic weapon. Sarah's survival instincts kicked in. She'd learned to be resourceful during her darkest days in Boston, when David's psychological abuse had forced her to plan escape routes and hide emergency supplies. Those skills served her now. First, she killed all the lights in the living quarters, plunging everything below the lamp room into darkness. The lighthouse beam continued its rotation. Stopping it would be more suspicious than leaving it running. Next, she grabbed the emergency bag she'd prepared on her first day, a habit from her old life. It contained a flashlight, first aid supplies, energy bars, and the one thing she'd hoped never to use again, a .38 revolver. Heavy footsteps echoed on the metal steps outside. Sarah heard voices, muffled by the storm but clearly coordinated. They were surrounding the lighthouse. A loud bang echoed through the building as someone tried the main door. It was locked, but these men wouldn't be deterred by such a simple barrier. Sarah heard the distinctive crack of splintering wood. She climbed quickly back to the lamp room, the only space in the lighthouse with multiple exits. Besides the main staircase, there was an emergency ladder that led down the outside of the structure to a maintenance platform. In calm weather, it was a routine way to access the exterior lamp housing. In this storm, it was nearly suicidal. The footsteps were inside now, heavy boots on the metal stairs. Sarah heard voices calling to each other, coordinating a search. They were professionals, probably military or ex-military. The kind of men who cleaned up messes for people with money and power. "She's got to be here somewhere," one voice called out, barely audible above the storm. "The light's been on," and someone called in the boat. Sarah's heart sank. They'd been monitoring Coast Guard frequencies. Of course they had. This was a planned operation, not some chance encounter. She crept to the lamp room door and listened. The footsteps were methodical, moving through each floor of the lighthouse. They'd reach the lamp room in minutes. Sarah made her choice. She eased open the door to the exterior maintenance platform and immediately regretted it. The wind hit her like a physical blow, driving rain into her face with stinging force. The platform was slick with water and barely wide enough for one person. Below, the ocean raged against the rocks, sending spray up nearly 100 feet. But it was her only chance. She stepped onto the platform and immediately grabbed the safety rail as a gust of wind tried to tear her from the narrow walkway. The maintenance ladder led down to a platform about halfway down the lighthouse, where emergency supplies were stored. From there, another ladder continued to the base. Sarah began her descent, fighting the wind with every step. The metal rungs were treacherous, made slippery by the constant spray. Her hands were numb with cold, and more than once she felt her grip starting to fail. Above her, she heard shouts. They'd found the lamp room empty and were searching for how she'd escaped. It wouldn't take them long to figure it out. The halfway platform was a blessed relief, a small enclosed space with actual walls. Sarah paused to catch her breath and warm her hands. Through a small window, she could see the yacht moored at the dock below, its deck lights casting an eerie glow on the churning water. More shouts from above, and now she could see flashlight beams probing the darkness. They'd found the exterior door. Sarah resumed her descent, moving faster now, recklessness born of desperation. The final ladder brought her to the base of the lighthouse, where the seawall provided some protection from the worst of the storm. Sarah crouched behind a storage shed and tried to plan her next move. The causeway to shore was completely underwater now, impassable on foot. Her only chance was the small emergency dinghy stored in the boathouse. The problem was getting to it. The boathouse was 50 yards away across open ground, and the men from the yacht would spot her the moment she moved. But staying here meant certain capture. Sarah checked the revolver, making sure it was loaded. She'd learned to shoot during those terrible months with David, when she'd lived in constant fear. She'd never thought she'd actually need the skill. A shout from above told her the men had reached the exterior platform. Flashlight beams swept the base of the lighthouse. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows and waited. One of the men appeared around the curve of the lighthouse, his weapon raised, moving in a tactical crouch. Sarah could see he wore night vision goggles. She was at a severe disadvantage. But she also knew something he didn't: the lighthouse grounds better than anyone. There was a maintenance trench that ran from the storage shed to the boathouse, originally dug for power lines but now used for drainage. It was partially flooded but would provide cover for most of the distance. Sarah crawled to the trench and dropped into 3 feet of cold, muddy water. The current was strong, fed by runoff from the storm, but she could move along the bottom using the walls for support. The water was shockingly cold, but it was better than being shot. She made her way slowly toward the boathouse, staying low, fighting the current. Behind her, she could hear the men searching the storage area, their voices carrying on the wind. Soon they'd expand their search pattern and find the trench. The boathouse was a simple structure, more of a large shed really, built partially over the water. The emergency dinghy hung from davits inside, ready to be lowered. Sarah had tested it monthly as part of her duties, never imagining she'd need it for a real emergency. She hauled herself out of the trench and into the boathouse, water streaming from her clothes. The dinghy was a 12-foot inflatable with a small outboard motor. In calm weather, it was reliable transportation to shore. In this storm, it was barely better than a life raft. Sarah began the process of lowering the boat, trying to work quietly despite the howling wind. The davits creaked and groaned as the dinghy descended toward the churning water. She prayed the men wouldn't hear over the storm. There, a shout from behind her. The boathouse. Flashlight beams swept through the windows. Sarah abandoned caution and released the davits, letting the dinghy drop the final few feet into the water with a splash. She scrambled down the ladder and into the boat, her numb fingers fumbling with the engine's pull cord. The first shot shattered a window above her head. Sarah ducked and pulled the cord again. The engine coughed but didn't catch. More shots, the distinctive rattle of automatic weapons. Bullets splashed into the water around the dinghy. The engine caught on the third pull, a blessed sound that was immediately drowned out by more gunfire. Sarah gunned the throttle and shot out of the boathouse into the open water, the small boat immediately caught by the storm's fury. A wave crashed over the bow, filling the boat with water. Sarah fought to control the bucking craft while bailing with one hand. The lighthouse beams swept over her, ironically making her a perfect target for the men on shore. More muzzle flashes from the boathouse, but the shots went wide. The storm was her ally now, making accurate shooting nearly impossible. Sarah pointed the dinghy toward the distant lights of Millbrook and held on. The next 20 minutes were the longest of her life. Wave after wave crashed over the small boat, each one threatening to swamp it completely. The outboard engine sputtered and coughed, occasionally dying completely before reluctantly restarting. Sarah's world narrowed to the simple task of survival: bail water, restart engine, hold course, repeat. She was hypothermic and exhausted when she finally saw the Millbrook Harbor breakwater. The protected waters inside were still rough but manageable compared to the open ocean. Sarah guided the dinghy to the harbor master's dock and collapsed into the bottom of the boat, her strength finally giving out. Harbor patrol found her there an hour later, barely conscious but alive. The story she told, men disposing of bodies from a yacht, a gun battle at the lighthouse, seemed incredible until the Coast Guard reached Beacon Point at dawn. The yacht was gone, of course. The lighthouse showed signs of forced entry and bullet damage. In the lamp room, investigators found evidence that someone had been monitoring radio frequencies and had sophisticated night vision equipment. But the most disturbing discovery came 3 days later, when the storm finally calmed enough for divers to search the waters near Beacon Point. They found 12 weighted bundles on the sea floor, each containing human remains in various states of decomposition. The investigation that followed uncovered a smuggling operation that had used the isolated waters around Beacon Point for years. Drugs came in, money went out, and anyone who became inconvenient disappeared into the depths. The previous lighthouse keeper, the one who'd vanished 20 years ago, had apparently seen too much. Sarah testified before a federal grand jury, helping to build a case that eventually brought down a network spanning 3 states. The men from the yacht were never identified, professionals who melted back into whatever shadow organization had employed them. She never returned to the lighthouse. The Coast Guard automated the facility completely, removing the need for a keeper. Sarah used the reward money from the investigation to start over. Somewhere far from the ocean, in a small town in the mountains where the only lights at night came from stars. But sometimes, on stormy nights, she still dreams of that beam sweeping across dark water, revealing secrets that were meant to stay hidden in the depths. She wakes with the taste of salt spray on her lips and the sound of engines approaching through the darkness. The lighthouse still stands at Beacon Point, its automated light warning ships away from the rocks. But locals say it's cursed now, haunted by the keeper who saw too much. They tell stories of strange lights seen on calm nights, of boats that approach the lighthouse and are never seen again. Sarah knows better. The real horror isn't supernatural, it's human. It's the willingness of some people to use the ocean as a grave, confident that the depths will keep their secrets forever. Most of the time, they're right. But sometimes, on nights when storms rage and lighthouse beams sweep the darkness, those secrets rise to the surface. And sometimes, there's someone brave enough to bear witness to what the waves wash ashore. The lighthouse keeper's job was always to guide ships safely to port. Sarah had done exactly that. She'd guided the truth safely home, no matter the cost to herself. It was, she reflected years later, the most important light she'd ever tended. In the end, that had to be enough.